1974. Kojak was the most watched cop show in the United States. But one event changed everything. People in the test groups were shocked into silence when they saw the controversial scene about police brutality. CBS got scared, the network blocked the video, and it was no longer available. Up until now, it was too real for TV, but here is the shocking truth about the Kojak moment. In 1963, a terrible crime happened in New York City that set the stage for the story of Kojak. January Wiley and Emily Hofford, two young women, were found dead in their Manhattan flat. People in the city were scared about the case, but what happened next made it even worse. For the crime, a young black guy named George Whitmore Jr. was caught. Even though he had nothing to do with it, the cops made him say it. His wrong judgment turned into one of the most important court cases in U.S. history. On April 24, 1964, Whitmore was caught. Detectives showed him a picture and said it was of Janice Wiley. It was really a picture of Arlene Franco, a person Whitmore knew from high school. The picture was lost in a park, but the cops used that against her. They questioned Whitmore for a long time. They wouldn't let him go. He admitted to killing Wiley and Hofford and two other crimes that had nothing to do with them when he was under a lot of stress. He lied when he said that. Whitmore wasn't even close to the murder scene when they happened. He watched Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech on TV that day in Wildwood, New Jersey. Even though several people confirmed his alibi, the cops didn't care. In 1966, he was freed on bond after more than 3 years in jail. In Miranda versus Arizona, the Supreme Court said that police had to read suspects' rights before questioning them. His case was a big part of that ruling. Richard Robles was the real killer. He broke into the flat to get money because he was hooked on heroin. He lost control and attacked them. Robles was caught in 1965 and given a life term. He said he didn't do the crime for years. At a parole meeting in 1986, he finally told the truth. Whitmore's wrong judgment showed that the justice system has major problems. His case showed how simple it is for bad police work to catch someone who isn't guilty. It also showed how dangerous it can be to make people admit against their will. Everyone could end up like Whitmore, accused, found guilty, and locked up for something they didn't do, if the law didn't protect people well. Mann, the man who made Kojak, was changed by this story for a long time. Reading Selwyn Robb's Justice in the Back Room changed everything for him. He was already interested in stories about justice. The book talked about crimes where police were dishonest and racist, showing that the system often failed to protect the people it was meant to. Mann learned something that he couldn't forget. It made him want to do something. Mann had also used stories in the past to bring up problems in the real world. It was for the movie Judgment at Nuremberg, which was about Nazi war crimes. He was interested in history, but not only that, he knew there was also wrongdoing in America. It was important to him that the show not only entertained people, but also made them think. That is how Kojak came to be. Theo Kojak wasn't perfect like most TV agents. He wasn't mean, but he was tough. The rules were important to him, but he knew the system was flawed. He was the kind of police officer that people thought should exist. Someone who wanted real justice instead of quick charges. Most crime shows didn't talk about the things that Kojak did. There were episodes about racism, police abuse, and corruption. These topics were shown in American living rooms in a way that not many shows had before. A TV show called The Marcus Nelson Murders was the first step on the way to Kojak. It aired in 1973 and was based on a true story. The movie did really well, and CBS quickly saw that they had something special on their hands. They asked for one thing before they would make it into a series. They thought Kojak should be a Greek Columbo. Once it was time to cast, CBS wanted Kojak to have a typical star man. They imagined a person who was neat and good-looking, like a normal TV hero. Mann, who made the show, had a different plan. No one else saw what he saw in Telly Savalas. It wasn't clear that Savalas was a movie star. You couldn't miss him. He was bald, had a tough face, and was so strong. Mann thought that being there was just what the show needed. At first, the network wasn't sure, but Mann wouldn't give up. Savalas was a well-known actress by the early 1970s. He was up for an Oscar for his part in Birdman of Alcatraz. He had also very good roles in Kelly's Heroes and The Dirty Dozen. His fame would rise with Kojak, though. The character was based on real agents who worked on the Wiley Hofford murder case, which changed the way police do things in big ways. When CBS made the TV movie The Marcus Nelson Murders, which introduced people to Kojak, Savalas was chosen to play the lead part. It was clear from how he played. He was great in the part. The movie sparked the idea for the show, and CBS gave it the go-ahead. From the start of the show, Savalas made the part his own. Every little thing about Kojak made it stand out. The sharp clothes, the tough attitude, the lollipop instead of a cigarette. The line, "Who loves you, baby?" became his trademark. Became well known. It wasn't a surprise that the show did well. 2 Golden Globes and an Emmy were given to Savalas. What's more, he changed what a TV detective was. In a trench coat, Kojak wasn't just another police officer. He was brave, knew his way around town, and had a charm that made it hard to dislike him. But Savalas wasn't the only one who made the show memorable. Police Officer Stavros was played by his real brother, George Savalas. There was no denying that the two of them got along on TV. Some of George's most famous roles were in Kojak. He had been playing for a long time and had been in shows like The Virginian and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. Stavros was a detective who often added a funny touch to the show. He was messy and quiet. George didn't use his real name in the credits at first. He went by the middle name Demosthenes Savalas, so no one would think his brother helped him get the job. But as time went on, his friends came around and used his real name. The Savalas brothers' closeness made the scenes feel real. It was more than just good acting. It made sense. George had been in shows like Death of a Salesman in the past, and he talked about that on the show. His death in 1985 was a huge loss, but his work on Kojak is still a big part of the show's history. He had to fight to get on the show. 2. Kevin Dobson, who plays Detective Bobby Crocker. There were over 200 players who tried out for the part. Dobson was turned down twice. He might have given up and left, but he wouldn't. He told his agent to get him one more chance after being turned down twice. He took a chance this time. He made fun of Savalas' lollipop habit during his tryout. It was a risky move that paid off. The group really liked it. He got the part. One thing that helped Dobson was his background. In his past life, he worked as a brakeman and conductor for the Long Island Railroad. He had also been a military police officer. Having that experience helped him make his part seem more real. His character was the person Kojak trusted the most. It was easy to tell that Savalas was joking when he called him Pussycat on TV. Their relationship was one of the best things about the show. Dobson was there for all 5 seasons and then came back for the Kojak TV films. The actor who played Captain Frank McNeil was Dan Fraser. He did a lot more than act. He worked as a soldier in the Special Services Division during World War II. That experience changed the way he performs. It made McNeil feel like a real experienced police officer because it made him sharp. They used to work together, but now McNeil was in charge. He was one of the few figures who showed up in every episode. In real life, Fraser had an unusual skill. He loved to play chess and would often play against Savalas in between takes. Their games were more than just a way to kill time. They told you something about Fraser's mind. He used the same smarts when he was performing. It wasn't just a hit TV show that Kojak was. It had an effect on culture. That changed the way crime shows were made and had an impact on viewers all over the world. From 1973 to 1978, it was the most popular show in the world, always in the top 20 for its first 3 seasons. People like how it had a mix of gritty reality and interesting storytelling. Major Theo Kojak, played by Telly Savalas, was at the center of it all. She was a tough but deeply caring officer who wasn't like the cold, no-nonsense cops you see on TV. He did more than just solve crimes. He cared about victims, fought against graft, and had a streetwise charm that made people remember him. Queen Elizabeth II was one of the more surprising people who liked Kojak. She wasn't just a passing fan. She cared so much about the show that Buckingham Palace asked for early copies of new episodes so she wouldn't have to watch them when they first came out. It was very rare for a world leader to be that excited about something, especially an American crime thriller. Not only was I interested, but it was quite serious. When she met Telly Savalas in 1976 at a state dinner put on by the U.S., she said, "My favorite Yankee," to President Gerald Ford when she met him. Politics were even talked about on the show. The word Kojak liberalism first showed up in discussions about police in 1993. Kojak wasn't just a police officer who followed the rules. That's right, he got along with other people. He knew that making charges wasn't the only thing that made a good cop. It was about having faith. Lawmakers used Kojak to show how cops could be both authoritative and caring. They said police officers shouldn't just keep people in line. They should interact with the neighborhoods they serve. It showed how strong Kojak had become, that a TV show character could change the way people talked about police work in real life. People all over the world watched the show, not just in the United States. A movie called Kojak in Budapest, Hungary, was made in 1982 to honor it. Even though it wasn't a direct sequel, it was clear that it was based on the first one. A Hungarian actor played a role that was based on Kojak from Savalas' play. A lollipop was one of the strangest and most telling signs of Kojak's impact. They were first used by Savalas as a prop to help him stop smoking, but they quickly became an important part of Kojak's image. The effect happened right away. One person even sued because of the craze. The company that makes Tootsie Pops, Tootsie Roll, sued Universal Studios, saying that the show had used its product without approval. In some Spanish-speaking countries, Kojak came to mean both lollipops and candy. It was not often that a single figure could change how much candy sold, but Kojak did it with ease. On the other hand, Kojak was never just another crime show. It was honest and gritty, and it wasn't afraid to deal with tough topics. But some shows did more than just tell a story. Some of them even got shut down because they caused real-life arguments and protests. The Corruptor, which aired in November 1973, was one of the most talked-about shows. It was about a Hispanic kid who was killed by a dishonest police officer. It was a very emotional scene. It showed how angry folks in the area had seen this happen too many times before and were sad and desperate. The show touched on police brutality at a time when things were already very tense. But what didn't run in this episode made it even more controversial. In the first draft, the victim's mother had a line that was honest and unvarnished. She meant to say, "NYPD pigs." That was too much for CBS. They cut the cue because they thought it would make things worse. The event was powerful even without those two words. After a year, there was a different kind of controversy over a different show. Hush Now, Don't You Die, which aired in October 1974, was about kids who had been abused. It was all about the victim and her family, especially her dad. He spoke in a strong moment that was honest, emotional, and full of anger. He wanted to do what was right, but he also wanted to get even. It was clear from what he said that he didn't trust the system to do the right thing. People thought that speech was one of the most powerful in the show's history when it first played. But it was gone when the episode was shown on TV all over the world. The network decided it sounded too much like a call for people to take action and do justice. They were afraid that it would make people think that they should break the law anyway. So they took it down, and fans once more noticed. A lot of people talked about the law scene. Then there was Queen of the Gypsies, which aired in February 1975. This show wasn't about police corruption or violence like the last two were. It had to do with stereotypes. In this episode, there was a crime in a Romani neighborhood, but it used old cliches to show things instead of being true to life. It gave the impression that the community was private and superstitious, which reinforced negative ideas that had been around for a long time. Quickly, people fought back. An advocacy group criticized the show for how it showed things. And the writers did something very unusual because of the harsh feedback. Even though they added a disclaimer to later broadcasts to say they were aware of the worries, the damage was already done. Even with the warning, the episode showed how the media can change how people think about things. It wasn't just one show. It was about how marginalized groups have been portrayed as cartoons for a long time. Kojak was still popular in the late 1970s, but there was trouble going on behind the scenes. New York City was having a very bad time with money at the time. The city had a lot of debt, which affected everything, even making TV shows. Not even a hit show like Kojak was safe from budget cuts. It was easy to see that Kojak's car had changed. A cheaper Ford was given to him instead of his nice brown Buick Regal. It was a small thing, but it pointed to a bigger issue. There were things that the show had to cut back on. In 1977, it was hard to ignore the fact that money was tight. It had always been pricey to film in New York, but now it was even more difficult to explain why it was worth the money. It was known for being tough and realistic, but making everything cheaper began to hurt the show. People who watched might not have noticed right away, but managers were working hard to keep the quality at the same level. Then there was Telly Savalas. He was more than just Kojak's star. His name was Kojak. He was ready for something bigger by season 5. He wanted to be paid what he thought he was worth. He asked CBS to give him an extra 50%. The network said no. They didn't give him more money. Instead, they cut spending in other areas. The money for guest stars was one of the biggest loses. It turned out to be a big mistake. Strong guest acts were what kept the stories interesting on Kojak. These parts were played by less well-known players, which made the show less powerful. The writing was good, and Savalas was still great, but something was missing. Ratings began to go down. Behind the scenes, things were getting worse between Savalas and CBS. Not afraid to speak out, he had strong ideas about how Kojak should be made. CBS, on the other hand, wanted to keep the show from losing money by cutting costs. As the stress grew, it was clear that the show's time was running out. CBS made the choice in 1978. Kojak wasn't made. Ratings weren't as good as they used to be, and it still cost a lot to make. It was easy for CBS to decide. It was different for Savalas. He had given that part everything he had, but now it was over. His last words about the cancellation showed how angry he was. They didn't call me because of a talking horse. CBS, who loves you now? He was talking about old episodes of Mr. Ed, which CBS picked to show instead of keeping Kojak on the schedule. Kojak didn't end there, though. Then it came back in 2005 with a new look. Ving Rhames played Detective Lieutenant Theo Kojak this time. With Telly Savalas in the lead role, the first season, which ran from 1973 to 1978, was a huge hit. His sharp work as a detective, Kojak was a memorable TV figure thanks to his tough attitude and signature lollipop. The goal of the update was to bring him to a new generation while still staying true to the original. It looked like the right time. There were crime shows everywhere. TV was full of shows like CSI and Law & Order. It was a simple idea: bring back a good detective and make him more up-to-date. The show had star power because Ving Rhames led the group. People knew Rhames for his powerful roles in Pulp Fiction and Mission Impossible. He gave Kojak a new energy that made him just as tough, but in his own way. The supporting cast made the movie more interesting. Captain Frank McNeil was played by Chaz Palminteri. Police Officer Bobby Crocker was played by Michael Kelly. The rest of the major cast was made up of Rosalind Sanchez as Detective Henry Messina and Ada Carmen Simone. The team worked well together, and the situations they worked on were tough and complicated. But despite everything, the show had a hard time. There were only 10 shows, and the first one aired on March 25, 2005 on the USA Network. The cases were very serious. Repeat killers. When there were hostages and gang crimes, the risks were very high. Still, there was something missing. Getting away from Telly Savalas was one of the hardest things to do. The Kojak he played was bigger than life. A lot of people couldn't tell the difference between the actor and the character. Even though Rhames was good, it was hard not to make similarities. Some longtime fans also thought the show was missing something when it stopped taking place in the 1970s. It was changed to fit today's needs, but some people didn't like the change. The critics also weren't pleased. Some people thought the writing wasn't as good as it was in other crime shows at the time. The pace wasn't as fast-paced as shows like 24 or The Shield. There were a lot of TV shows, and Kojak didn't stand out. It was over by May 22, 2005. The reboot was over after the network turned off the show. It wasn't because they didn't try. There was a great team, interesting cases, and the show was backed by a well-known brand. But it's not always enough to bring back an old favorite. It was hard to make the original Kojak work like it did. Telly Savalas made Kojak famous, but what's surprising is how his made-up detective still has an effect on real cops today. The NYPD has a group of agents who are known as the Kojak Squad. It's not a real title, but it shows how much they respect the character's unique way of questioning people. Kojak had a different style than the violent moves that were common in police shows at the time. He got suspects to tell the truth by using humor, charm, and a deep knowledge of how people work. In place of threats, he made them feel like he knew what they were going through. That made them mess up a lot of the time. It wasn't just good TV. Real police officers saw how well this method of questioning worked. Over time, police have moved towards methods that depend on trust. Kojak's strategies fit right in with that change. Many police stations now teach their officers how to listen actively and show empathy when questioning suspects. It's an easy idea. When people feel like they're being heard, they are more likely to talk. Some NYPD officers still talk about Kojak when they talk about how they work. It is still important for police to be tough, but also understand people, even though the world of security has changed since the 1970s. Hollywood knew that Kojak had a lasting impact, so they tried to bring him back. They planned for Vin Diesel to act in and produce a new Kojak show in 2012, but the plan never went through. What is the main reason? the family of Telly Savalas. They were very worried about how the figure was being updated for today's times. The first Kojak was a detective who was smart on the street and depended on his gut and experience. Diesel's version put a lot of emphasis on technology, which made Kojak a high-tech crime hunter. That was a bother. The reboot took too many liberties with Savalas' character, according to his family. Kojak wasn't just a way to catch crooks. It was about a detective who could read minds. His family was afraid that if he focused on technology, he would lose that part of himself. Without their permission, the project was put on hold. It wasn't just about keeping Kojak's name alive. It was about making sure that the new version of him didn't change what made him great. Some figures don't need to be brought up to date. What made someone famous in the first place is sometimes the same thing that makes them timeless. Kojak isn't really gone, though. Recently, rumors about a Law and Order versus Kojak crossover have been spreading. The idea has been brought up on TikTok by Ariana Savalas, Telly Savalas' daughter. The posts have led to a lot of guessing, but she hasn't said anything for sure. If it's true, Kojak would become one of the most popular crime shows on TV. It might also be a way to bring the character to the attention of a new age while still keeping what made him unique. It would be hard to make Kojak work in the modern world. The first show dealt with some very serious problems, but police work today is even more closely looked at. Things like racial bias, using too much force, and community trust would have to be dealt with in a reboot. In the 1970s, those problems weren't looked into as closely. A Law and Order. Kojak's show could bring the past and the present together. It might bring back Kojak's sharp wit and never-ending desire for justice if it's done right, while still making him important to people today. Whether these rumors turn out to be true or not, the fact that Kojak is still being talked about shows how important he was.